The following program may contain coarse language, violence, nudity, mature subject matter, or scenes which may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back to the new hour and the new day here in the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. It is now the date of September the 28th, 2022 here in Eastern Canada. And once again, we are watching the events that are happening within the Caribbean and Florida, the Gulf of Mexico, with the new hurricane that is going to cause some havoc, Hurricane Ian. So that is on our watch list here. And if we get any news bulletins from our newsroom, we'll certainly pass them on to each and every one of you. To all our listeners who are down in any area that is in danger because of the hurricane, please listen to your local government officials, law enforcement agencies, and when they tell you to evacuate, they're doing this for your good. Please follow their instructions and seek safe shelter. My guest this hour is Dr. George FAREED. He is a medical doctor. We're going to be talking about COVID. Remember that stuff, COVID? You'd be surprised to know how many places in St. Catharines, Ontario that are locked down, and I'm talking about senior home medical facilities because of COVID outbreaks. It's not over yet, gang. And Dr. FAREED, welcome to the X Zone, sir.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's a pleasure to be on the X Zone, and congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Dr. FAREED, you and Dr. Tyson wrote a book entitled Overcoming, let me see if I get that. I've got to get this right because I love it. The name of the book is Overcoming the COVID Darknessis, How Two Doctors Successfully Treated 7,000 Patients, by yourself and Dr. Tyson. 7,000 patients. That's a lot of patients, doctor. Where did you find the time?
It is a lot. It's risen up to 12,000 or more.
My Lord.
And it's still extraordinarily successful. It's been very gratifying as a doctor to be able to have accomplished this. It's at toward the end of my career. I've been in medicine for 52 years. I was a graduate of Harvard Medical School and on the faculty at Harvard and NIH for a period of time, overlapping with Fauci then. Mm-hmm. But I went into academia. I could have stayed at the NIH. I'm glad I didn't. I also was on the faculty at UCLA, and I decided to go into family practice in a rural, underserved area 32 years ago in California. I just wanted to make a difference as a doctor practicing medicine, and it's been a wonderful experience. But we, the book Overcoming the COVID Darknessis by Brian Tyson and George FAREED. My name is misspelled there. It's FAREED. But in any case, it's a sojourn of our experience when we were the epicenter for COVID-19 in a rural, underserved area of California in 2020, March. Mm-hmm. And we used repurposed medications in a very effective protocol and built upon studies from other labs and over many years to show that these agents, particularly hydroxychloroquine, were excellent antiviral agents, very safe and extraordinarily effective if used in the right way early in the infection. And it's been my belief throughout this pandemic that the whole pandemic would have been would never have occurred if and millions would be saved if they had done the right thing of emphasizing early treatment from the beginning. And we, as I said, have seen 12, 13,000 now with recovery, don't go to the hospital, don't get intubated and die from COVID-19. And even those that once they've recovered, they have durable natural immunity. So they're far better off than those that might have been vaccinated.
So, why don't you think, doctor, that your method for treating COVID was not the main method for treating COVID if it could have saved so many lives?
Well, it mystified me, somewhat as a idealist, I guess, and purist, and
Hmm.
one who wanted to accept authority and agencies and academia, since I came from that. And it was clear cut that that wasn't the case, that there were big agendas in play that corrupted everything at the expense of lots of very fine people suffering and dying unnecessarily. And I saw that. I treated in the hospital, I treated in nursing homes, which I
Hmm.
still treat in. We saved everyone in our nursing home, almost everyone, with COVID in the early period with our protocol. And we tried to get it recognized in any way we could. I spoke in the historic first Senate hearing in November 19, 2020, on early treatment with Dr. Peter McCullough and Harvey Reish. And we thought that would bring light into this and the correct approach, but it didn't. And our book is an attempt to accomplish that. It's this book here, um, and
Hmm.
we give the protocol in the book, and we had to publish our paper in our book because peer-reviewed journals refused to accept it for different petty reasons for months and months. So we published it in our book by the biostatistician who did the analysis of the first 4,000 or so patients. And then
Let's go back to the beginning, doctor. In your opinion, what caused the COVID pandemic that swept the world?
Well, it was an extraordinarily virulent, engineered or create a lab created virus, the COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2, that had a genetic changes introduced into it, and what turned out to be horribly malicious and virulent and dangerous, such that it could infect and damage the respiratory system of humans. But that's what caused it. It was a presumed lab leak from Wuhan lab. It certainly could never have come from nature, and
Hmm.
that's what we didn't realize that at the beginning by any means, and we just knew we had to deal with something very bad and very vicious. And I'm a very long-term virologist in my background, and I headed our HIV program in this Imperial Valley for 30 years. I still do. And I knew that vaccines can't be made against a mutable virus like HIV, and certainly not against mutable coronaviruses. And they're not even well made against influenza virus for that matter. But regardless, that's what happened was that they shut down our approach generally throughout the world in order to move forward with these gene therapy vaccines, because they needed to get emergency use authorization, which couldn't have been accomplished if protocols such as ours were available to cure the condition.
What's the cover up here, doctor?
It's a cover up of the truth, and basically, and the not accepting the guilt and the responsibility for what was inflicted on the whole world. It's interesting if you look at underdeveloped countries and the developed countries, the countries that rolled out these agents, these gene therapy vaccines, have the worst demise of population per million compared to those underdeveloped countries that couldn't vaccinate.
Hmm.
They're far better not doing that. But it was a matter of money and politics and power influences that were behind it all. Something I'm not a part of it and never have been in my career.
So, do the vaccines that everybody was scared into taking really necessary? Did they work?
I would have loved if they'd worked. I fell for it. I got the 2 doses right at the very beginning because I
Mhm.
being in the hospital and in these clinics, and my community was going out to get them in December, January 2020. Uh, and we were led to believe that they were 95% effective. One of the, which they certainly have not been, they should have been 100% effective to be introduced into a pandemic. And we have a chapter in our book on the harm and failure of the vaccines. And we point out in scientific studies in animal systems for pandemia, vaccines that don't sterilize or don't protect completely, they perpetuate the pandemic in these animal systems. So they ignored science, actually. And I took it because I was led to believe it was 95% effective. It should have been 100% effective, but I hope for the best, and it certainly was not.
All right, with your method of treatment, were there as many waves as the for the different COVID strains that were being discussed and were being terrorized when it came to the John Q. public?
Well, for our protocol, which is agnostic, which is cell-directed, the host cell-directed, not viral-directed, it's been effective for every wave there is. All of the variants have responded to the treatment of the multifaceted sequence drug therapy. And it's, if that's answering your question,
Yes.
And it's and we still are shamed, or not shamed, but we're here in California. There's a bill that would the governor is waiting to sign that will direct the medical board against people like me if I don't agree with the dictums of the societies here, the medical societies, that is, or the FDA, or even though we all should have our opportunity to make a decision as to what is best for our patients. And that's what I've always done.
In your opinion, whose pockets were being filled because of the COVID pandemic?
Well, it's certainly the pockets of these pharmaceutical companies. And
Big pharma.
Our gross national products have been plundered as a consequence. But there are other pockets, and those are the people that were in cahoots with it all, like Fauci and many others.
You and I have to take our first break, Doctor. Please stand by. Exonation Dr. George FAREED is our special guest. And if you'd like to find out more about Dr. FAREED, if you'd like to get a copy of his book, it is called Overcoming COVID Darkness. And the website is overcomingcoviddarkness.com. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Dr. George FAREED is my guest this hour, Exonation. His website is overcomingcoviddarkness.com, and it's available. His book is available on Amazon.com. The title is Overcoming COVID Darkness. Do you see the return of COVID as large as it was in the past pandemic recurring? Or do you think monkeypox is going to take over the marketing ploy?
Well, certainly monkeypox will not do that. It's not at all capable of accomplishing such a feat, and it's been greatly exaggerated. So there's no worry for that. And with regard to the COVID potential for it becoming a bad acting variant, there is that possibility, unfortunately, with continued vaccines being used that select for changes, genetic changes. The changes that have thus far been selected for have been primarily in infectiousness of the variants. But it's quite possible, it would be terrible, but it may select for one that is greater virulence, greater potential for lung infection or heart infection. And that would be terrible. And that has to fall at the fault of putting immune pressure on a mutable virus without the ability to sterilize or block its multiplication.
It seems as if the virus learns and tries to beat the previous version and making it harder on humans. Is this common with a pandemic and whatever is in a virus, or is this part of the genetic manipulation and manufacture?
Well, it's come from genetic manipulation and manufacture because that's what made it so infectious and dangerous for the human population. But at this stage now, it's just part of the nature of a mutable virus, and we see that with HIV. Human immunodeficiency virus and AIDS. We see that with the many other members of the RNA viruses, such as respiratory syncytial virus and other coronaviruses. And the other viruses haven't been manipulated to have a sequence inserted that predisposes it to being more infectious in humans and to be able to attach to a receptor on the respiratory tract of humans. And that's what's the tragic crime, basically. But that's to be expected. It's part of the life of a virus and its genome. It wants to persist in the environment, and it does so by rapidly mutating. It's not a slow process. Other viruses are very stable genetically, mainly the DNA viruses, like the herpes virus, for instance. And the rapidly mutating viruses, that's just part of their how they are, basically. They evolved to mutate, to perpetuate themselves.
How has your book been received by other members of the medical community?
It's had good reception by those that have recognized the truth that's in the book, and they've had very positive reviews on Amazon, and it's but it didn't get any big newspaper review or any publicity, as I should say. It's all been like with great shows like yours that we've been able to acquaint people with it, or by our speaking at meetings or international meetings. Such as a meeting that I was in Belize, in Brazil at the Iguazu Falls in the beginning of July of the Alliance for Doctors conference on COVID-19, or meetings by many other doctors. And my colleague, Dr. Brian Tyson, we're part of the Global COVID Summit organization that tries to educate and continually has gatherings to inform people of the truth and what they need to know and what they have to follow from with their own knowledge, and not be told what to do, but without appreciation of all the dangers of what's being told them.
Wasn't there a time when President Trump was promoting your type of response to the COVID?
Well, it was right at the beginning with
Hmm.
my friend, great friend and hero and leader, was Dr. Vladimir Zelenko from the
Right.
upper New York State. He died sadly. He fought a battle with a
Oh,
very bad lung pulmonary artery cancer, sarcoma, and succumbed. And the day before I spoke in Brazil, and I dedicate my speeches now to him. But he had the earliest results in Upper New York. They were seeing the epidemic occurring weeks before other parts of the United States, and he was using adapted work a protocol from that of Dr. Didier Raoult in France and based upon studies that even Fauci had published on hydroxychloroquine as a very excellent antiviral for coronaviruses, published in 2005. And in any case, so he had a protocol that he had basically 100% success with in hundreds of very vulnerable patients in Upper New York State, and he got the ear of President of advisors to President Trump and eventually to President Trump in March of 2020, and that's what spurred Trump to recognize it publicly. And then from there, it was just a bombardment of negativism to undermine anything that was coming out of the White House. And very bad actions of that task force, and they led the United States terribly down the road of destruction and damage from this pandemic. They're a very bad task force, and they undermined hydroxychloroquine and were vicious and dishonest about it. And others were from academia, apparently paid off by pharmaceutical companies. It's very sad. I come from Harvard, and Harvard people actually published work that was so negative and subsequently deemed spurious or untruthful and had to be retracted. But it got into the Lancet, and then the genie was out of the bottle. So I would prescribe my protocol, and they'd say, "Oh, this is so dangerous. It doesn't work," and all this. And it was very, very rough going. But getting back to Trump and the White House, you're right. And yet then he got convinced that the gene therapy vaccines were the solution, and warp speed was the way to go, and all that. And so he missed his opportunity to do the right thing.
What was the availability of your treatment, and how fast could it have been distributed on a massive scale?
Oh, it was extraordinarily available, and there were people that undermined it from the inside of the government. Rick Bright and Woodstock, and other Janet Woodstock from the former FDA, who they actually made it such that the stockpile that was there in Washington, in the government, of tens of thousands of doses could not be accessed, of all things. But it was still readily available. Our protocol for 10 months was just the HCQ and doxycycline, azithromycin, zinc, and vitamin D, and aspirin. And so it was still available, and it was not. It could have been made widely available.
So why wouldn't an organization like WHO step in?
Yeah, they were behind it all. They didn't want to support something of our that was repurposed and generic, and they had other intentions. Yet they should have, absolutely.
Yeah, it makes no sense if you've got something that works.
I think they were bought off by Bill Gates and by the other major financial entities that are have been predators in this pandemic.
But at the cost of how many millions of lives, sir?
Oh yeah, that's what makes me so sad. It's a collateral damage of 15 million in the world or more, plus that many or many more that are injured and whose lives have been traumatized horribly, but they go on. That for this purpose of the vaccine approach, the faulty vaccine approach.
In my opinion, sir, this is a crime against humanity.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And is anybody going to be held accountable for this, in your opinion?
I would hope so. We'll see how things go forward, but they should be. That's what we have a number of books that go along with our book on this, that The Courage to Face COVID-19 by John Leake and Peter McCullough is a very excellent book. I'd highly recommend it. Many other books, actually.
There was more than just the physical aspect of COVID. There were people who were financially ruined, businesses that were financially ruined.
It's pitiful.
And then you have the psychological effect and what is known as the COVID fog. And people, I know people who have been affected by COVID to such a degree that now they've got PTSD.
That's true.
It's a crime. This is a crime.
It is a crime. There have been breakthroughs in understanding long COVID and understanding how to reverse some of the immune abnormalities that occur in that, and also appreciation of the fact that the S1 fragment of the spike protein can persist in certain atypical, what are called monocytes, for months and probably 15, 16 months in the body. So it just doesn't go away, and unless you do something to get it out and block it. And now we understand more about how to do that.
And if it doesn't go away, can it resurface in the person's body and cause it all over again?
No, it won't do that. And thank goodness. The unfortunate thing is, though, the illness itself, and if it's not treated and interfered with before it spreads through the body, and these immune gene therapy products, vaccines, are able to cripple parts of the immune system and do real harm immunologically in small numbers, but significant numbers of people. So we're seeing a surge of not only adults, sudden adult death occurring. We're seeing cancers coming out that we wouldn't have expected to come out so quickly and so ravagingly, because of the crippling of the ability of the immune system by these spike protein entities to suppress the natural cancers.
Doctor, you and I have to take our break. Please stand by. And Exonation, if you'd like to get a copy of Dr. FAREED, Dr. FAREED's book that was written along with Dr. Brian Tyson, visit www.overcomingcoviddarkness.com, and we'll both be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Exonation, Dr. George FAREED is with us this hour. First of all, Doctor, thank you so much for being with us. Great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
And first of all, I want to thank you for all that you and Dr. Tyson have done in getting out this message. Hopefully, if we find ourselves in the same situation that we did at the onset of the COVID, pandemic, that someone will have the common sense to contact you and say, all right, you had it right the first time. We didn't listen to you. Talk to us now. What would you tell them?
I would say that they need to listen to me or us, as well as many colleagues that had the same approaches around this country and around the world. It's a international collection of scientists and doctors who knew what to do. And the major key was a fever clinic concept, and that's what we had in our area with my colleague Brian Tyson's urgent care center. I had clinics in addition with the hospitals and the offices that I work in, but in the fever clinic, you're able to do diagnostics, you're able to provide immediate treatment, and you're able to overcome the anxiety of individuals and know that they're on the right track to becoming completely normal within 24 hours. But that's what should have been set up. Fever clinics all over the United States with primary frontline medical personnel, bringing the individuals in and making them reassured that what they have, if they're free of the lung involvement, they can go on or the oral respiratory tract medications, and they can then it can be intensified very easily to allow them to prevent hospitalization.
When I look at the statement that you just said, completely normal in 24 hours, and I think of all the people who lost loved ones.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's like I'm appalled, and I'm amazed that no one is bringing anyone to task.
Yeah, they're set in their agenda. Unfortunately, and some are brainwashed, and they won't bring themselves to admit to what has gone wrong or what should have been done, and others are don't care. Actually, I think they're hardened. And it was like at our Senate hearing in November of 2020. I spoke of 1,000. We at that time had more than 1,000 patients with success. And the opposition there, the Democrats, had no interest in listening, inquiring further about that. But it's a issue of doing what you can as a doctor. It's your responsibility to help an individual sitting across from you that's ill in the best way you can. And that's how we started our program, and we've continued that up to this point.
I wonder if anyone has done a forensic accounting of the amount of money that has been paid to the pharmaceutical industries, and as well as the horrendous costs that I'm sure every hospital in the United States and Canada and around the world where COVID had to incur. And then you've got the burnout factor of the first responders, the doctors, the nurses. When we look at war crimes, we can understand it. But is the whole thing here that this was something to help humanity? So we're not going to rock the boat. We're not going to stir the crap in the pot. What we're going to do is we're just going to let it silently go along and let Big Pharma and other people who filled up their pockets with the money based on deaths and lies.
It's inexcusable. It can't be done. It can't be accepted. We need to change, hold those guilty accountable, have them prosecuted and put in jail. But regardless, I think when you bring up hospitals, the hospitals were incentivized to do the remdesivir, for instance, treatment that was dangerous and not effective. And they were incentivized by getting quite a bit of bonuses for every COVID patient that were there. I saw this because I treated in the hospital as well as out in the outpatient setting. So I would try to treat my patients coming in with our protocols, and I would be stymied because the FDA hadn't given recognition of them, and I would my colleagues there would follow the guidelines, and they would immediately stop everything I was doing, putting the patients on remdesivir, and most of them slid down into long-term mechanical ventilation and death. And so I eventually stopped going to the hospital after 2 years. I gave up this year in 2022, and just there was no point in continuing with bad protocols that we were forced to use because of finances that were being received by the hospital and by government agencies that were failures.
Was this a way of weaning off the weak in society to bring down the cost of medical treatment of the old?
I don't think that's it. It's hard to say about that. I think that it was a weekend showing. It showed the weakness that occurs in our medical system and in our society in terms of vulnerability that is there. It's very disillusioning. The academic medicine institutions around the United States and the world were committed to not going into these humane approaches that we were using, and they closed the specialist would would say there's no benefit to what we're doing or that I've been doing, and they in academic institutions in our state in particular, there would be a hush hush about any use of generic repurposed medications like hydroxychloroquine.
Did we learn anything that can be or will be used the next time we're faced with a pandemic of the size of COVID?
We have learned a great deal, and my colleagues and I'm part of this group that have published on the early treatment of COVID-19, a multifaceted sequence drug treatment, and it was we owe a lot to, as I said, Zev Zelenko and Didier Raoult in France, but Peter McCullough from Texas has been the leader of our effort and is a very brilliant man who with high principles. And so we published in December 2020 the paper that I thought would change everyone, but it had no effect at all. Principally, again, everyone looked for the guidance and acceptance, the seal of approval from Fauci or the FDA. And that was not to come.
So who would have the power to squash a paper like that?
A paper like our paper?
Like the paper that you wrote?
Oh, it's just the editors of the journal that are following the guide of another group, presumably that are backers of financially supporting that journal. Almost all of the academic journals of great reputation, like the New England Journal of Medicine or the Lancet, the American Journal of Medicine, have big funding from pharmaceutical companies. And they
there you go. Big pharma.
Yes.
You know, I've talked to a number of people within the medical community, and when it comes to the elderly that are in the hospitals, the message that I get, not in their terminology, but in the terminology that I think they're trying to tell me, because they can't tell me what really is going on, because of course I'd blab it to everybody, but you keep people alive in the hospital as long as you can, because the hospital makes money and big pharma makes money. Humans are a commodity now. It's
become that. I have to agree with you. However, you have to have a compassion as a doctor, and that's what I've tried to have throughout my career. And so I'm the medical director of a convalescent hospital locally, and I do everything to avoid the suffering of these individuals, even though they're at the ends of their lives. And particularly when they contracted COVID-19, I didn't hesitate to start them on our protocol, even though I was being criticized by the county health officer of our state in our region, and threatened to go before the medical board. And 29 out of 31 survived, and are doing very well. And since then, we've had small outbreaks in these vulnerable people, and they immediately go on our protocol. We've modified it. We add in other agents like molnupiravir or Paxlovid, but always with hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, and then the components that I mentioned before, the doxycycline or zinc and vitamin D, and if they can, get the monoclonal antibody. So it's multifaceted, and it's
Right.
you just modify and improve all the time. But it's foolproof such that our original protocol is as good as any of the ones that we have now.
Dr. FAREED, what are your final thoughts? What are your final words that you'd like to share with the X-Zone Nation tonight?
I'd like to share that the listeners look into what they're being told, try to get the facts before them of what actually is truthful about anything they're taking or anything they're recommended to take, and not just going along with a dogma that's being provided, because that's what failed us in this pandemic.
Doctor, I want to thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. And Doctor, I appreciate what you and Dr. Tyson have done getting this word out here. So thank you very much. And I hope I have the pleasure of talking to you again, sir.
I look forward to it. And thank you for all you do. It's a great show you have.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Take care of yourself and stay well, my friend.
You too. Bye.
Good night, Doctor.
Good night.
Exonation, Dr. FAREED has been our guest, Dr. George FAREED. The name of his book is Overcoming COVID Darkness. That's Overcoming COVID Darkness. It's available on Amazon. And visit his website, www.overcomingcoviddarkness.com. I'll be back on the top of the hour, because we do have to take a special report from our newsroom about breaking events in Florida due to Hurricane Ian. I'm Rob McConnell. We'll be back at the top of the hour. Don't go away.